Story 1. I was on the phone with my mother when the last words I said to her were "I love you." We never had the best relationship, so having those words as the last thing I said to her is comforting. Story 2. I had my parents, my brother, and my sister-in-law over for a big dinner. It was the perfect night. Everyone was in a great mood. The food turned out perfectly, and there was so much laughter. The next day, my mother had a massive heart attack and passed away. Story 3. One of my favorite uncles was diagnosed with cancer and died within 6 weeks. Family was visiting, and my parents downplayed how bad it was. My cousin called and said, "If you love him, come now." I drove 6 hours. On his last day, I held his hand and talked for 2 hours about how he made childhood fun, the impact he had on my life, teasing the rest of the family and telling each other we loved one another. He said some of the kindest things anyone has ever said to me. Story 4. I went for an afternoon walk in the city with my dad a few days before he died of a heart attack. Story 5. My best memory of my late great-grandfather is when I made berry tea, but when I returned he had nearly finished it. Laughing, he said it smelled wonderful. I couldn't be mad, so I made us both another. Story 6. The night before my mother died in hospice care, she looked at me with the most heartbreaking eyes and asked why she was still alive. I told her I was doing my absolute best. An hour later, she developed delirium and became terrified that God was not real and that the devil was there to take her. I am agnostic. I told her that the devil was trying to shake her faith because he had one last chance, but we both knew that she was going to heaven. As I spoke, her fear began to diminish. I immediately changed her care plan so she would not feel pain or fear. She passed peacefully 10 hours later. Story 7. My dad had me, my partner, and my son over for dinner. He was always something of a good cook. He was preparing a roast, and when I walked in he was stressed because everything was burning. I told him to sit down and relax. I knew he was not in the best of health. I took over the cooking while he sat down and I kept checking and helping him. We ate that burnt roast together. I wish I could relive that day and have that roast with him all over again. Story 8. 2 days before my brother had a sudden, fatal stroke, I had the urge to tell him one more time that I love him. He was the best big brother, my best friend, and a father figure as I was growing up. Even if he had not been my brother, I would still have wanted to be his friend. We had said that to each other many times over more than 4 decades. That he knew it before his stroke is something I will always be grateful for. He was the black sheep of our family and grew up feeling unlovable and unworthy of happiness. That is probably why, as a young girl, I was drawn to loners. I did not want anyone to feel unloved. Story 9. I have a couple of memories. One is a conversation with my maternal grandmother the evening she passed. I asked her what her favorite song was, and she said "Till the End of Time" by Perry Como. Whenever I hear it, I think of her. I was able to visit my grandfather, her husband, the weekend before he passed. It was a good weekend. We went out to eat. Story 10. My dad died in 2010. Cancer is a bitch. In 2008, my parents and I went to Chicago for a convention. Dad had recently had a bypass and could not fly, so we drove from New York City. I was a spare driver. My cost was a side trip to the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. While they were at their convention, I explored Chicago. We were there for 5 days. On the 3rd day, Dad asked each morning what I was going to do. I said I was going to see a German submarine at the Museum of Science and Industry. He asked if I meant the German submarine U-505, the one captured on the high seas in World War II. I said yes, and he said he was coming with me and that we would drive. We had a lot of fun. Dad was like a kid in a candy store with an unlimited charge card. He ditched the convention to spend time with me doing something we both really enjoyed. We had done many things together, but this seemed more special than most. He passed away in 2010, but this is something I will always remember. I was 37 at the time and Dad was 65. Story 11. My grandpa and I used to sit on the porch and watch thunderstorms together. He said the lightning reminded him that nature always speaks, we just have to listen. I think of that every time it rains. Story 12. On the first day my husband was moved to the nursing home for hospice care, he stayed up late with me and our friends, talking, cracking jokes, and reminiscing about old times. After that day, he slept more and began to deteriorate. He thanked me for loving him, and I thanked him as well. Story 13. My grandfather gave me a record signed by David Bowie the week before he passed away. Story 14. It was not one big event, but all the small, quiet moments. My favorite was lying with my head in my grandma's lap, half watching some old television show she loved. The world would just pause. It was perfect, the safest I have felt. Story 15. My mom lives across the country. We had been looking forward to my cousin's wedding for almost a year. She was flying out and we were driving to a beautiful fall destination for the wedding. She was excited about the hotel, the venue, and the fall scenery. She arrived a day early and had a wild, wonderful night with her sister and her nieces and nephews. They drank a lot and made some hilarious videos together. She called me that night to tell me how much fun she had and that I had to see the videos. I arrived the next day, met her, and we were so happy to see each other. We went to the wedding. I drove down winding country lanes to the venue. It was a beautiful, memorable evening. She was surrounded by family who had not seen her in a while and had loving conversations with everyone. I drove her home that night, normally very nervous in the passenger seat. She was totally at ease, laughing as we went around corners. I said good night, told her I loved her, and that I would see her in the morning. She passed that night. I found her the next day. It was painful and unexpected, but it was beautiful that we all had one last chance to be with her and have a great time. Story 16. I gave my dad my bomber jacket and a squadron shirt with his name on it. He was proud of me for serving in the United States Air Force and proud of my younger brother for serving in the United States Navy. My brother and I have long since retired from the military. Story 17. My father was feeding me lunch when he began to feel chest pain. It turned out to be a heart attack. I remember the feeding part, but I do not recall exactly how that memory ends because I was very young. Story 18. I was in college with a guy I had kind of known from school. We were always cool with each other and became really good friends. We would talk shit all day. It felt like Clerks, but with us in an engineering course instead of working in a store. I remember once we were listening to Papa Roach's debut and suddenly burst into the workshop singing Dead Cell, making rock horns and headbanging, only to be greeted by the lecturer and a group of prospective students being shown around. It was awkward as hell, and we laughed about it for ages afterwards. Less than 5 years later, he died of lymphoma at 23. I miss you, mate. Story 19. My best memory with my dad was when we'd nap together. He would cuddle me without hesitation, and we could stay like that for hours. I was 20 years old, but I never stopped enjoying that closeness. I'll never forget how safe and loved I felt during those times. Story 20. My father succumbed to Alzheimer's after a 5-year battle. A month before he died, in a final moment of clarity, we had a heart-to-heart while watching football and he gave me his favorite watch. I will defend it with my life. Story 21. I took my 98-year-old grandfather and my son to his farm so he could check the progress of the corn. It was a perfect day and a wonderful memory. Story 22. We were sitting by a bonfire in our friend's garden, talking and drinking whiskey. Suddenly she asked, "Wait, why is the house turning orange?" We realized we had been talking all night, and the sun was coming up. She was a brilliant friend, and I miss her.
Story 23. Avoir pu la voir avant qu'elle ne parte, et se dire au revoir avec cette émotion, sachant tous les deux que c'était certainement la dernière fois que nous nous voyions.
Story 24. I got the call that no one wants to get. I flew from Philadelphia down to Pensacola to say goodbye to my dad. He was in the hospital and very out of it. They decided to move him to hospice. As they were putting him on the stretcher, he regained consciousness temporarily. There was a great deal of fear in his eyes. I was able to look him right in the eye and say, "Dad, I'm here and I love you." His eyes softened, he smiled slightly, and then closed his eyes. That was the last time his eyes were open. Story 25. My granny was amazing. She took me to museums on the train during summer holidays. If my parents needed me out of the house for a night, I would sleep over at my granny's. I loved her so much that I would ask to sleep over even when I did not need to. She loved being a granny and she loved me and my sister. Even in her last years, she was always happy to see me. The day before she passed, I called just to check how she was. I promised I would visit the next day. I still remember her voice and how she said, "Love you too, cherub." I never got to see her. She was taken into the hospital. I could not visit, but my mother went, which I think mattered the most. It has been about 20 years since then. 17 years ago, my mother became a grandmother, and she is so proud. I think she tries to live up to her own mother's standards for a granny. Story 26. My grandmother took my then girlfriend and me to dinner at a cozy restaurant before she could no longer walk and before she underwent the surgery that led to her rapid decline. She did not live long enough to see our engagement. We made sure she had a seat at the family table at the wedding, right next to my parents. Story 27. When my mom was dying of cancer in home hospice, I spent every day with her for about a week. She alternated between being catatonic and having moments of surprising clarity and energy. One day, I was holding her hand at her bedside when she suddenly jolted awake, looked at me, and blurted, "You are the apple of my eye." My brother-in-law was sitting on the couch. I turned to him and said, "Did you hear that? I am the apple of my mom's eye." He nodded, slightly unimpressed. My mom settled briefly and then suddenly sat up again, looked at me, and blurted, "You are the bane of my existence." She then fell back asleep. My brother-in-law and I laughed for 30 minutes. My mom died the next day. Story 28. My niece was given 6 months to live. She was 36. When I got divorced, she and I grew very close. We would go out and spend time together. She, her fiancé, and I would go out for drinks. Then we received the diagnosis. My mother, my partner, and I drove to see her. As soon as we saw each other, our eyes filled with tears and we hugged. Tears ran freely. A few months later, when the end was near, she and her husband renewed their vows. It was a wonderful day, filled with joy and love. I paid for them to stay at the Hilton so they could enjoy the time she had left. The memory of her smiling at her daughter and hugging everyone makes me both smile and cry. She was such a beautiful, loving, caring woman. I miss you, Tyrion. Story 29. One of the last things my grandmother, my father's mother, told my dad was that she hoped I would find someone who makes me happy. I am not sure if she knew I was gay. When he told me that, I loved her even more. I miss her. Story 30. My dad invited my uncle over on Christmas Eve. I was not thrilled because he struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. He never celebrated Christmas with anyone, so this was a rare appearance. We scaled back our festivities because of him, but we ended up having a great evening. I opened presents with him. My dad and brothers talked with him for hours, and my mom made him a hot meal. It was nice. I thought it would be a good gesture to invite him every year. It never happened. That turned out to be his last Christmas. 6 months later, he was killed in a road accident. My dad had to bury his baby brother, and we were all devastated. I wish I had known then, but I take comfort in knowing he spent Christmas with his family for once. I wish we could have done it again and that he were still here. Story 31. I lost my little brother a few years ago. There was a big age gap between our older siblings and me, so he and I were essentially raised together. We shared many memories, but one stands out. He came to visit me and we listened to some of our old music. The song "Use Me" by Bill Withers played, and we both laughed and sang every line. We had a great time. Now it is very difficult to listen to that song. Story 32. Hindi man perpekto. Ang huli ay nag-video call kami ng lolo ko sa group chat namin. Nagbukas ako ng kamera, hinawakan niya ang screen ng cellphone, umiyak siya, at sinabi niya, "Love you, Apple." Story 33. My last interaction with my uncle by marriage was when I was massaging his hand. He was suffering from early onset cancer, which at the time we thought was just a nerve disease. When I saw him in 2022, his right arm was weak, which made work difficult. He was a cook, and during my visit, I mostly assisted him in the kitchen. I also fed him one of my dishes, which turned out a bit salty. It still makes me chuckle that my first and last dish for him was such a cliché. I hope you are happier in heaven, Uncle. Story 34. Watching the sunset with him, laughing as if nothing else mattered. That moment still warms my heart whenever I think of it. Story 35. My grandpa on my dad's side had Alzheimer's disease. I visited him several times on my own and he didn't recognize me. It was devastating. Later, as he neared the end of his life, I visited with my two brothers. He recognized us as a group. It was a huge relief to know he retained that memory before he passed. Story 36. A woman who was my caretaker when I was a child. I sometimes went to the beach with her grandchild. We were all friends and had a great time. I do not remember the details, unfortunately. Story 37. My mother and I had breakfast with my grandfather at his favorite diner on the morning he died. He was completely normal and happy, and he died of a brain aneurysm later that day. I am glad he most likely did not suffer. Story 38. My grandfather was in the hospital after a massive heart attack. I cannot remember if he was resting, but his eyes were closed. We were leaving for the night, and I was saying goodbye. I said, "You take care, old man." He turned his head and winked at me, which made me smile. After that, he became unresponsive and eventually passed away. Story 39. I am a registered nurse and cared for a 17-year-old patient with cystic fibrosis. A few days before he died, he was craving Kentucky Fried Chicken. My friend and I disguised him with a hat and sunglasses, placed his wheelchair in the back of her car, and drove him to a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. Rest in peace. Story 40. I lost a friend last week. The last thing he said to me was that he would buy a car. He bought one but died a week later. It was not a car accident. He simply fell asleep and never woke up. Story 41. My husband died of cancer this morning. His favorite food was brownies, but he didn't eat them anymore because he was diabetic and stuck to a healthy diet. About 5 days earlier, it became apparent that he would die soon. So while he was still able to eat and drink, I had his friends bring him homemade brownies and some Diet Coke. He wasn't able to eat much, but he enjoyed a few brownies and a couple of cups of Diet Coke, which meant more to me than anyone could know. Story 42. The last time I remember seeing my grandpa was after he had the medical event that started his decline over the next few months. He was sitting in his chair, very still, looking at nothing. Nobody had shaved him, so the usually clean-shaven, crisp grandpa I loved looked suddenly old and smudged. It was during the brief period when things opened back up after the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, but I hesitated at the door because it did not feel like him and I was afraid. He heard me stop, turned his head and looked at me for an instant without recognition. Then he smiled his dear smile and said in that tender, humorous voice of his, "Come and kiss me, lamb. I haven't got the plague." In that moment, he was my grandpa again and nothing else mattered. I spent the evening with him, talking about who knows what, pausing every so often while he had the miniature seizures or whatever was happening. Mother says he was at a family party later that same month, so I did see him again, but I have no memory of that. The last clear memory I have is of him looking at me, smiling, and saying he did not have the plague. I can hear his exact words still and see him sitting in the chair that is now empty in a house that is now sold. The medical event came out of the blue. He had been healthy until he was suddenly in the intensive care unit. Then he was out of the hospital for a couple of weeks. In that single golden week, when he had regained enough strength to talk and before the eventual fatal decline, I visited. "I loved you so much, Grandpa. You died more than 5 years ago, but writing this still makes me sob. You are still here. I see you every time my dad laughs, and I feel you in the twist of my own sarcastic smile that my dad once said looked like you. You are not gone while there are people who loved you. Rest well, dear heart, in love." Story 43. Dave let me ride his Harley-Davidson motorcycle. He looked like Jesus Christ, never stopped talking, and always had a beer in his hand. He was always on the go. We miss him. It is terrible that his best friend came over and killed him with a Uzi submachine gun. I am glad I was not home that night. The attacker would have killed my wife and me too if we had been sitting in Dave's living room as usual, talking and drinking. Your story would make a wild movie, buddy. Love you, Dave. Story 44. The best moments are always boring until they become the last ones. Story 45. My grandpa gave me a large piece of cake that I used to make my cousins jealous. He also killed 3 chickens for all his grandchildren that Christmas. I miss him. Story 46. Before my grandfather passed away, I spent one last Christmas with him. He died 2 days later. Story 47. Last year, Father's Day weekend, my grandpa invited me to a Father's Day event his church was hosting. I'm not really a church person and didn't feel like going, but I had a nagging feeling to go. At the last minute, my mom's boyfriend said he would pick me up and go as well. My grandpa really loved him, and my mom had a prior commitment. I had a good time, sat next to my grandpa, talked to him, and made him take a selfie with me, which I had never done before. He was so happy I came. The next week, he kept complaining about his neck, saying he couldn't hold his head up, and we got concerned. My mom went to his house to take him to the emergency room for a second time. The first time they had prescribed pain patches and sent him home. She called me in a panic, hyperventilating. I thought she was going to tell me he had died. He collapsed and she had to do chest compressions on the phone with emergency services. He lived for a few months after that but never left the hospital. He had prostate cancer for about 15 years. They had actually told me he had a short time to live when I was 9, and he passed away right after my 25th birthday. We were Libra buddies. He stayed around for my birthday and passed at 11 p.m. on his own birthday. He was my mentor, and as much as I miss him, I'm grateful for the love we shared. I'm especially grateful that I went to that church event and saw him walking around and smiling one last time. I never would have forgiven myself if I had missed it. Story 48. My dad died less than a month after my birthday last year. We made smoked salmon bagels together for breakfast that morning before I went to work. I'm glad I have that memory. Story 49. My first close friend helped me find even more close friends. Story 50. I watched my late mother read to my son. He was 5 when she passed, and I am so grateful I have those memories and that he remembers her. Story 51. Sometimes the best memories are the ones you didn't know were the last. Story 52. Funny how the best memories are just quiet moments that seemed ordinary until time made them priceless. It makes you realize you should treat every mundane day as if it might become the one you look back on when nothing else matters. Story 53. My grandfather had a stroke that left him in a chair for the last 8 years of his life. He struggled to speak. The summer he passed, I was working on the other side of the country. I would hike up to a payphone a couple of times a week to call. If my grandfather heard my voice on the answering machine, he would pick up and we would have long conversations. His difficulty speaking seemed linked to anxiety about the person sitting in front of him. I was more than 2,500 miles away when he passed, but it was the closest I had ever felt to him. Story 54. Visiting my dad in hospital while he was still in charge of his cognitive functions, I teased my husband about his attempts to tidy his mustache. I still remember waving goodbye to my dad that day. He was at the window of his hospital room as we walked to our car. I stopped to see if he would be there, and he was waving at us. It still makes me tear up, and every time I visit that hospital I look at that window and remember him there. He died a few weeks later, but I will never forget that last visit. Subsequent visits were after his cardiac arrest, and he was no longer in his right mind. Story 55. A few years before she died, my grandmother told me on the phone, with absolute sincerity, that she believed dragons existed. She loved dragons, read fiction about them, and sincerely believed they once existed. She lived through the Blitz, served as a military nurse, raised 7 sons, and endured a difficult marriage. I hope that if I live into my 90s, I can still retain wonder and whimsy after decades of experience. Story 56. The morning I saw my mom, she was awake, happy, and coherent. 15 to 20 minutes later, she passed away. She had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 15 years earlier and had developed dementia. I chose my last memory of her leaving this world to be of her, happy and with a belly full of food. Story 57. When we have a heart-to-heart conversation, my mom opens up to me about everything. Story 58. It was with both of my grandparents. My granddad was a hoarder and would get a paper every day. He had a stack of them and would put the one from yesterday on top. The previous day's headline happened to say the pedo. My granddad had folded the paper in half and tucked it under his arm, so we could only see the pedo as he waddled to his newspaper stack. I pointed it out to my brothers, who burst out laughing. Then my nan quipped, "You're not too old to get a smacked bum," to my older brother in his mid-30s. Times with Nan were tough later due to dementia, but it was good to see her humor still there even during some of the rougher times. Story 59. My dog was dying in August 2023. The prognosis was fairly quick after the vet found a mass in his mouth. That kind of mass usually carries a 4 to 6 week life expectancy. He weighed only 5 pounds. I am a photographer and spent several long evenings with him in a field, having him chase me while I took his photographs. No one at the park knew. About a week later, he declined and could no longer go for walks. He required more intensive care. After he passed, I made large 47-inch prints for the family for Christmas. They looked incredible. Story 60. We stole my mom's car before I had a license. To avoid the police, we used unpaved country paths and got stuck in the mud. We spent hours getting out and then continued driving. The next day, he was not at school. By the end of the week, he had died of an aneurysm. That was the last time I saw him alive. Story 61. It was either at the end of my 6th birthday party or the day after. My aunt, who passed away in a car crash, came over with a cake. It was a simple cake, still in the pan with frosting on top. It was my favorite flavor, strawberry, with strawberry frosting and pink crunchy crystal sprinkles, and my nickname was written in pink jelly. I remember sitting in front of the TV while my aunt sat on the couch with my mom. As they talked, I watched a cartoon and ate from the cake pan with a spoon. Story 62. My grandpa and I ate pancakes before he passed away. He lived to a good 96 years. I miss him so much. Story 63. The last conversation my sister and I had with our dad, after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, but before things got really bad, took place at the minibar in his basement. He told us how proud he was of us. Story 64. I was taking care of my mother while she was in hospice. We were alone, and I lay my head on her shoulder and said, "I sure hope you know how much I love you." She put her hand on my cheek and said, "Precious." Those were the last words she spoke to me. I treasure this memory. Story 65. I miss my dad. I have a lot to say. Story 66. My brother and I used to play Call of Duty Black Ops Zombies for about 2 or 3 years. Even after we both moved out, he left 5 years before I did, and we still played online. He passed about 2.5 years ago. Sometimes I look at his Steam profile and see our shared screenshots. Seeing his last online number near 1,000 is the saddest part before the happy memories. It has been 907 days now. We played online the same day he died. I will not forget that. Story 67. My grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's before she passed in 2008. During one of the last times I saw her, I played songs on my acoustic guitar and danced around for her. I must have been 12. She could not speak, but her smile said it all. It was powerful because it was my Nana who bought me my first guitar when I was a child. We were a poor family, but she saw how curious I was when I was about 4 and she bought it for me. When we immigrated, that same guitar came with me. I have been playing guitar ever since. I am now 31. Getting to play that guitar for her when she was frail and ill and seeing the smile on her face meant everything to me. Felt like a full circle moment. I wish I could play for her now. She would be so proud. Story 68. I was 15 when my great-grandmother was succumbing to very aggressive cancer and was in hospice care at home. We visited, not knowing it would be her last days. I was not very close to her, but she had taken care of me occasionally, so I decided to learn a religious song and perform it for her on my guitar. I had been learning guitar for 1 month. The next day, I played the song Allaber for her. She loved it. She passed away the following day. Story 69. In the last conversation my dad had with his brother, he told him that I was naming my son after him. Story 70. My grandmother used to cook a lot for me. She had suffered from malnutrition in her childhood, so she was traumatized and fed me generously, always giving me everything I wanted. I remember as a kid watching a television commercial for sausages filled with cheese and getting very excited. I told my grandmother and we went to the supermarket. That night my dinner was cheese-filled sausages, Spanish tortilla, Swiss chard fritters, and rice. Story 71. I visited my grandmother in her last couple of days as she was dying of cancer. She was partly awake, not very aware as people often are in that situation. I look a lot like my dad. When I left, she told my mother that it was nice of Jim to come and see her. She was apparently very moved by his visit. They had not seen each other since my parents divorced about 10 years earlier and had never really gotten along. It was nice that, by accident, I helped her make her peace with him. Story 72. I got to take my daughter swimming when she was 6 months old. I felt so guilty that I hadn't taken her sooner. I also had a toddler, and their father was working out of state. She loved it. Had I known it would be her last time in a pool, I would have stayed for hours. She died of a terminal illness right before she turned 1. Claire, my sweet girl, whooshing you around the pool is a memory I will treasure. Story 73. My dad called and left a voice message thanking me for a favor I had done. He said it was nice to see me and that he had enjoyed our time together. He had never said anything like that before. He died 3 months later. Story 74. My dad passed away just 2 days after my little brother's funeral. That was the last time I ever saw him. On Father's Day, I called to tell him I was leaving town to go back home and to say goodbye. I told him I loved him. He said, "I love you too." Those were the last words I ever heard him say to me. I need a drink now. Story 75. My best friend had cancer. Her husband called to say she had only a week to a month left and asked if I wanted to speak with her. I did. It was wonderful to talk to her, but afterward I found there were things I wished I had said. She did not have a wake. She had a celebration of her life. It was a barbecue with a large poster showing her from childhood to the present. I am so glad I spoke with her, but I miss her deeply. I lost so much history and there is no one to talk with about our teenage years. It was always me, her, and Kenny at the water tower. Kenny passed away years ago. At the water tower others came and went, but it was the three of us like the Three Musketeers. Story 76. Both of my great-grandmothers helped me at the same time, one on my mother's side and one on my father's side. My great-grandmother on my mother's side took me in the day I returned to her and my grandfather's home after running away for 3 weeks. She hugged me, gave me a towel, told me to wash while she cooked, and laid out clean pajamas. I showered, got dressed, ate, and fell asleep in the recliner. She told me it was all going to be okay. My grandfather, her son, and the homeowner helped raise me from that point and shape the man I am today. 2 weeks earlier, my other great-grandmother on my father's side took me in for a night and did the same. She gave me clothes and fed me. I slept on the couch overnight and left in the morning because my mother was on her way after my great-grandmother finished yelling at her for causing me to run away. She made me eggs, bacon, Spanish rice, and chicken. It was the first thing I had eaten in a week that was not a stolen fig from the fig trees in people's yards. They both passed away years ago in the mid-2000s. I miss them both. Story 77. I still think about being cast as the lead in the Schoolhouse Rock musical. Every day after school for weeks, my dad played the soundtrack while we played video games on the couch together. We would have dinner, then watch movies and share a tub of cookie dough for dessert. He died in 2007, and this is one of my favorite memories. Story 78. My father and I did not talk much during my teenage years, but when I got married at 20, he showed up 4 states away for the wedding. About a year later, he came to visit while I was getting divorced. He gave me the Stratocaster he had made at the Fender facility in 1996. We had Jaeger bombs. About 3 months later, the Piper twin Comanche he was co-piloting crashed in a cabbage patch. I would prefer to have my father, but those memories and the fact that he died doing the thing he loved most are a great comfort. Growing up with divorced parents, we spent nearly every weekend at the airport or in the air. He eventually got his commercial pilot's license so he could fly for Doctors Without Borders. Story 79. I took my mom to get her haircut a few months before she passed. It was the last time I saw her in person. I had spoken to her on the phone the week before. She was a homebody and very ill, so she did not go out except to see the doctor or go to the hospital. It was wonderful to spend an entire afternoon at the salon and have dinner with her. Story 80. I was visiting my mother in the hospital. She watched shows from her childhood. One day I came in and she was watching Little House on the Prairie. We watched it together. I told her it was such a shame Mary was blind because she never knew she was the most beautiful. Person in tone. My mother burst into laughter. She had been in pain for years, and I had not heard that true laugh in a long time. My mother had been a very silly woman before she became ill, and she had a great laugh. It made me so happy to see her happy for a moment. Story 81. When my father had cancer and was in hospice care, I slept in a large recliner in his bedroom. We watched Game of Thrones together every night. Story 82. Golfing with my grandfather was an experience I never knew would have such an impact on my adult life. Story 83. My father and I played small tricks on each other for years. In the last couple of days of his life, Dad was unconscious. My wife and I sat by his bed, holding his hand and talking to him and to each other. His breathing gradually slowed and then stopped. After a little while, I reached over to close his eyes. Just as I did, he took one last long, loud breath. I nearly had a heart attack. The old bugger got me one last time. Story 84. I was on a call with my best friend, and the last words I said to her were, "I love you." We had a wonderful relationship. Saying, "I love you," as my last words to her was painful, but her last words were comforting. Story 85. I remember when my dad drove me around on his motorcycle. Fridays were a highlight when he got off work earlier than usual and picked me up from kindergarten. We both wore helmets, of course. Sometimes I would wait for him at the crossroads near our home and jump on for the last few meters. I would give anything to experience that again. Story 86. My husband died at the end of April. He had become rather difficult during his last year. The last time I saw him, he started to give me a hard time, so I backed out of the bedroom, talking over him and saying nope. I never spoke to him again. It was not a bad memory. Felt fitting for the two of us. Story 87. My grandmother died 3 years ago. 5 days before she passed, we gathered at my grandparents' house for my grandfather's birthday. She had health problems and used a cane to walk. That day she was smiling and said she did not need the cane anymore. She was the happiest I had seen her in a long time and praised me for looking like her and for starting college soon. She was hospitalized 2 days later. I wish she could see where I am now. Story 88. My dad and I were riding down the road when a song he loved came on. He stopped in the middle of the thankfully open road, got out, and danced beside the car. I regret that 14-year-old me only laughed and felt embarrassed. I wish I had gotten out and danced with him. He had a heart attack about a week later. I often think of that day, him dancing in the middle of nowhere, one of many fun and silly moments we shared. I only hope I can be as great a parent as he was to me. Story 89. My grandmother taught me a Polish song from her childhood, but she did not finish teaching it because she passed away the next day. We did not have the best relationship, so the lesson was very meaningful to me. Story 90. My father died of fentanyl abuse. He was in my life only sporadically, but he loved me even though most people thought I was lame. Once, while I was in college, he bought me a full dinner, encouraged me to take the biggest plate, and we saw a movie. After he dropped me off, I called to say good night and he said, "Phew, I didn't know if I'd get home. I'm out of gas and I have $4 in my account." He was not asking for money and would not have accepted it. He worked 80 hours a week as a longshoreman to pay court-ordered financial obligations from time in jail and prison. He was a former member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and somehow fully accepted my interracial relationship because he loved me. He would have spent his last dollar on me. Story 91. My grandmother and I baked her secret apple pie recipe one autumn afternoon. She told stories of her childhood, laughing so hard we forgot the oven timer. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. I hold on to that warmth every day. Story 92. A 14-year-old girl I knew passed away. When she was 12, I went with my mother and others, including her, to a show. She went on stage with other children because she was the oldest age allowed. I think she enjoyed it, but she would not admit it. When she returned to her seat, she said she hated me, but it was playful, not mean. Story 93. A close family friend passed away. I have many great memories with her. She was also my boss for a while. Something very close to my heart is her last text to me. "You're a rock star, just like your mom." My mom and I were crying. Story 94. My grandfather on my father's side is the only grandfather I remember, so by default it is my best memory. He was apparently a hard man. My father tells me stories about him even decades after he died. When my father was a child, my grandfather was not around much. He worked at a machine shop or at a bar. He was not abusive toward my grandmother, but he was often absent. He was grumpy and strict with my father and his siblings most of the time, but he always provided for them. He did not show his emotions openly. My father said he told his father, "I love you," regularly, but his father almost never said it back. The first time his father reciprocated was when my father came home after joining the military and had a drink with him at his regular bar. He was the stereotypical old-fashioned, no-nonsense, small-town blue-collar father in the 1960s and 1970s. My only memory of him is from a hospital visit when I was about 5. My grandfather had heart problems and, unbeknownst to us, he died a few days later. While we were there, I climbed onto his hospital bed and accidentally bumped him. He winced in pain and my father scolded me. My grandfather told my father, "Shut up, they are kids. Let them have fun." That was the opposite of how he had treated my father as a child. I said, "I love you, Grandpa." And he smiled and said, "I love you too." I remember the smell of hospital chemicals, his bare feet sticking out from the bottom of the blanket, and his warm smile as he watched me struggle to climb onto his bed. He had softened in later years, but I still wish I had known him better. It is unfortunate that my only memory of him comes from a hospital visit a few days before he died. I feel I know him from my father's stories. My father loved and respected his father despite how he was raised. Story 95. My nan gave me a monkey toy before she died. I cherished it forever. Story 96. My granddad, technically my step-granddad on my dad's side, left me with a couple of core memories. They are small moments because we did not see each other much, but I really loved him. He was funny, very handy, and protective of his granddaughters. I was obsessed with "Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared" when I was in my early teens, so for Halloween my friends and I decided to go as characters from it. My granddad helped me make my Colin the computer head. There are no photos, unfortunately, but it was a fantastic copy and an amazing costume. I loved it, but I had to get rid of it because my mom did not want it in the house if it was not being used. Once, when I was allowed to invite a friend for a sleepover, he attached sledges to the back of a golf cart and drove us all around the fields when it was snowing. On my 15th birthday, my granny took me out. She bought me a plastic crown for the day and some party glasses. We ended up meeting Granddad in the car park. He wore my crown and glasses and made silly faces, which made me light up. About 7 or 8 years ago, he died by suicide at home. He had a lot of mental health issues that I did not know about. My granny on my mom's side was not the nicest person, but I remember one happy memory with her. We had a girls-only sleepover with me and 2 cousins. We watched movies, ate popcorn, made posters that said "No boys allowed," and had sweets and milkshakes. This was my favorite memory with her. Story 97. My uncle told me the secret to life. He had brain cancer and spoke to God a few times before he passed away. He had an intelligence quotient of 170 on paper and was extremely well-read and cultured. A true Renaissance man. Story 98. We went fishing with my grandfather. I was 5 years old, and it was the first time I had gone. It remains one of the most joyful memories of my life. He died of lung cancer 2 days later. He never told anyone. Story 99. My dad's favorite memories were of bedtimes when my sister and I were little. He would come home from work, sit on the floor next to her bed, tell us stories and sing songs, tuck her in, carry me to my bed, and tuck me in too. It was another 40 years before he died. Those were the happiest memories of his life. Story 100. My music instructor played some of the most beautiful music I have ever heard on my acoustic guitar for over an hour straight. It was the first time he had played in a while and his last. He took his own life a few days later. Story 101. The last time I saw my granddad, he climbed inside a tent playhouse and played with me, using toys and teddy bears to invent stories. I was 8 and he was 55. He was in hospice care for stomach and lung cancer. I have very few childhood memories, but this one is so vivid it is bittersweet. Story 102. When my father was in the hospital, I went home and brought his radio so he could listen to a hockey game. I called him as soon as the game ended. We had won and I told him to get some sleep. An hour later, a nurse called to say he had slipped into a coma, and he died a few hours after that. It was very unexpected, so I am glad he went to sleep happy. Story 103. I kissed my grandmother, who had Alzheimer's, on the head while she was in the nursing home and listened to her talk about her husband, Elvis Presley. I miss her so much. Story 104. I had the opportunity to speak to an elderly aunt less than a week before she passed. She called it a goodbye visit. I asked her about her life's greatest joy, accomplishment, and lesson. It was a beautiful reflection on her life and what she had achieved. Story 105. My friend was killed when he was almost 17. I was not quite 15. A few days before he died, we sat in the park across the road from my parents' house late at night, doing silly young things, talking and looking at the stars. He fell asleep holding my hand while I chattered on. He was a kind person, and I am a better person for having known him. Story 106. Mom always loved to see me do well and wanted to help. She bought everything I needed for my first apartment before I enlisted. It was heartbreaking to see her in the hospital after wandering while homeless with brain cancer. Medical providers denied her treatment in the early stages. Mom had a terrible lifestyle of fast food, diet soda, and cigarettes. She lived to age 65 despite being in a cancer cluster linked to hexavalent chromium, tobacco smoke, and aspartame. Many people who eat at Whole Foods do not fare better. I am tired of pollutants. She always had so much hope for me, born on Chicago's north side with a decent water table. Story 107. I held my father's arm and massaged it as he took his last breath. Story 108. My great-grandmother invited me to go to church with her. This was after I came out as an atheist, which was not taken well by my Catholic family. I was pretty angry at the way my mother and grandmother were treating me, but I just could not say no to my great-grandmother. As the edgy, rebellious 20-year-old, I went to church wearing an Avenged Sevenfold t-shirt, skinny jeans, and a spiked belt. She did not say anything about it. She held my hand and smiled at me. I still think that is the moment I stopped being edgy about my atheism. I am still not a believer, but I have mellowed my attitude toward religion. Story 109. My grandfather taught me to ride a bike, running behind me until I realized he had let go. I still hear him cheering when life gets wobbly. Story 110. Before my wife passed away, she was in a coma on a ventilator with COVID-19. I was at her bedside, pleading with her to recover and not to leave me. I held her hand and gently rubbed it. Even in that unconscious state, I could see tears rolling down the sides of her face. A few hours later, she passed away. I will never forget those tears. Story 111. I played the piano with my late grandmother and learned from her. I now have her piano. Story 112. A wizard with 14 arrows in his back said to me, I, Zamabis the wizard, bestow upon you, noble coyote, sentience and awareness. Please go get me dash, he gargled and then disappeared as he died. I do not know what he wanted. Story 113. Damn. Can't think of one. I used to watch Independence Day every time I visited my aunt's house when I was a child. Story 114. I called my mother on the morning of her 69th birthday. We chatted. I told her gross jokes that made her laugh. I wished her a happy birthday and told her how much I loved her. She died 2 days later. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.